Everyone who thinks the government is your friend, welcome, esteemed crypto experts and investors, welcome to exposing the U.S. government agencies attempting to silence you crypto investors, any whistleblower and monopolize crypto, for the benefit of the government, to the detriment of you and I in the dynamic world of cryptocurrency. Ethereum Foundation, second only to Bitcoin, finds itself embroiled in a contentious dispute. This involves startling allegations of a multi-agency government conspiracy aimed at prosecuting a whistleblower under false pretenses to monopolize cryptocurrency on behalf of governmental interests. Ethereum, renowned for its utilization of utility tokens ETH on a purportedly decentralized platform, prides itself on operating autonomously and transparently. The decentralized nature of its network stands as a cornerstone, as only sufficiently decentralized cryptocurrency networks evade classification as securities by regulatory bodies like the SEC U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, thus avoiding stringent regulations and mandatory disclosures. Presently, ETH remains outside the purview of securities regulation due to its detachment from centralized profit structures or efforts. At the heart of this saga lies Steven Nerayoff, a luminary with over 40 patents in the AI and crypto domains, who asserts his role as a co-creator of Ethereum through initial capital infusion and conceptual frameworks. Astonishingly, Nerayoff recounts declining what would today amount to billions in Ether, propelled by his unwavering belief in Ethereum's transformative potential and his commitment to fostering a decentralized network free from conflicts of interest. However, dissent over Ethereum's internal structure led to Nerayoff's abrupt disconnection from Ethereum's communication channels, triggering a series of perplexing events. Nerayoff engaged the services of a consultant, Michael Halady, operating under the alias Michael Peters, to conduct background checks. Halady, presenting himself falsely as a former member of the U.S. military, NSA, FBI, and CIA, allegedly made statements in a cryptocurrency deal involving Nerayoff that laid the groundwork for an FBI extortion charge against him. Subsequently, the FBI secured an arrest warrant, albeit without a search warrant, for Nerayoff's house, culminating in an interrogation concerning prominent figures in the crypto realm. Notably, the FBI's pursuit of Nerayoff in court took an unexpected turn, with the government moving to dismiss the case, citing an inability to prove charges beyond a reasonable doubt. These events have sparked speculation within the crypto community, suggesting a concerted effort by the government to target Nerayoff as part of a broader strategy aimed at seizing control of the top echelons of the crypto industry to monopolize cryptocurrency systems. As this gripping narrative unfolds, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the heart of the matter.
Sources telling ABC News the search is related to allegations the former president improperly removed documents when he left the White House. Tonight, heavily armed Secret Service agents stand guard at the gates of Mar-a-Lago, and this evening, former President Trump issuing a new statement calling the search a horrible thing. Tonight, what we have now learned about how this unfolded, where they searched, and about pressure mounting on the Attorney General Merrick Garland and FBI Director Christopher Wray, appointed by former President Trump, to somehow explain this highly unprecedented raid. Dan Abrams is standing by on this, but we begin tonight with our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, leading us off.
We're learning new details about the FBI's extraordinary raid on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago property in Palm Beach. Law enforcement sources tell ABC News that 45 minutes before the FBI showed up, the local FBI field office in Miami gave the Secret Service team in Mar-a-Lago a heads up.
Well, let's say it this way. You wrote stories critical of the government.
Yes.
Yeah. You factually reported. And then you did on Fast and Furious, you did on Benghazi and other issues.
Yes.
And even before, as you said, on the Bush administration. And then strange things started happening to you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like your computer, you think your phone gets bugged, you believe, and things happen to your computer after you wrote stories critical of the government.
Right.
That's scary, right?
Yeah, it's not a
frightening
comfortable
everybody.
feeling, right?
Ms. Harridge, you wrote stories critical of the Biden administration. Is that true?
That's fair.
I mean, you wrote a number of things about the laptop issue, about Hunter Biden, all kinds of things. You wrote critical of the Biden family, the Biden business operation, the Biden brand, and all that stuff.
Congressman, I reported out the facts of the story.
You sure did. You sure did. You reported the facts. And then CBS fired you. Is that right?
My position was terminated.
Yeah, and you're an award-winning journalist. How long did you work at CBS?
I worked at CBS News for 4.5 years. During that period, we won major awards. I was part of an Emmy-winning team. I was nominated for investigative Emmys. I think the most important projects were projects that drove legislation here on the Hill that positively impacted 1 million veterans.
So award-winning journalist, won all kinds of awards, had worked there almost 5 years, had extensive experience at a different major network prior to that, where you were also an award-winning journalist, done all kinds of reporting critical of the government there as well, and then you get fired. But it's worse than that, isn't it? Because they didn't just fire you. What else did they do?
On February 13th, when I was told on a Zoom call that my employment was terminated, I was locked out of my emails and I was locked out of the office. CBS News seized hundreds of pages of my reporting files, including confidential source information.
And that's not normal, is it?
No, that's not my experience in the other two networks that I've worked at or with my colleagues at CBS News. When the network of Walter Cronkite seizes your reporting files, including confidential source information, that is an attack on investigative journalism.
Yes, it sure is. So I'm just trying to, it seems to me there's a pattern developing here. You're critical of the government, Miss Atkinson's situation, and shazam, they start doing all kinds of strange things to your phone line, to your computer. You're critical of the government at a major news organization, and you're an award-winning journalist. You've been there 5 years, you get fired. But
it's kind of timing is interesting because we were just on another podcast, and we were looking back, and in 2014, the Federal Reserve, talking about social policy, they were looking into crypto, and we met with them back then. So it's not surprising to me. And what was really interesting about what I just said was they did an interagency task force across the entire U.S. government, and they spoke to basically line employees. Except for the Federal Reserve, they specifically spoke to the governors of the board of the Federal Reserve.
Interesting. What do you think about the substance of what this guy has said about the legacy to hold the line against Trump and that sort of thing?
Well, I think that's very similar to the policy. That's how I make the policies in quote, because these are not official policies; these are rogue agencies that have their own agenda, and so. They want, Trump had certain policies in place that I believe are actually very beneficial for the economy. And I think there was a dual mandate. It intersects with my story very much. And one was to stop it, so his popularity would go down. And so the second part was so that they would be able to capture. And he was trying to uncapture these agencies, which are really just, when I say capture, I mean they're controlled by the incumbents. In this case, it would be like banks, for example, in the Federal Reserve.
So we're on with Steven Nerayoff. We did a story last week about ETHgate. He's responding to the Federal Reserve. The timing is providential. Donald Trump posting today that inflation is back and raging because they, quote, Federal Reserve wants to protect the worst president. He means Biden. In the history of the United States, that post was today. Inflation is up. Steven, we're going to talk about ETHgate for about 20 minutes. Tell us, and I think we have a few people joining us. We got Nick Sorter joining us in a minute. Alan Dershowitz was here. I don't know where he went, but if you're still there, Alan, and you want to jump on to talk about how this corresponds with the so-called deep state, tell us about the evidence that you have, because you've told me and told others that there's a connection to the Chinese Communist Party and SEC corruption. We've covered this possible false prosecution by multiple agencies against you, but maybe you can talk to me about the next iteration of what evidence you have about the Ethereum gate scandal.
Yeah, so everybody should know, yesterday I filed what's called an FTCA, Federal Tort Claims Act, suing the government in the amount of $9.6 billion in damages. That stemmed from a prosecution that was a fabricated case that actually never happened, that I suffered through and defended myself. And Mike Scott, my attorney, if he could request to be a speaker here, he's here also, for 4 years. What we were able to, what I think was, there's a couple of things unique about this, but certainly unprecedented. What we were able to show was a coordinated, so let me put it this way. Most of the times when you see these situations, they write it off as there's a rogue agent, a bad apple, like some low-level FBI agent, and then they were able to write it off. And so the agency doesn't itself take a reputational hit. And in this case, they're not able to do that. And the reason why they're not is because we were able to show a coordinated effort between, let's just leave it at minimum, at the SEC, the DOJ, FBI, which is a division of DOJ, but it's also its own entity. Those three were coordinating. There's a couple interesting things. Number one, the SEC was leading that criminal prosecution against me. The SEC is a civil agency that's outside their jurisdiction, so they shouldn't be leading a criminal prosecution. And the DOJ claimed that they were not involved, except when I asked for data on the Privacy Act. They said they had 14 gigabytes of data. That's, for people who don't know, that's just like a lot of pages, right? That's for somebody not investigating me. In the interim, they're working with the DOJ and the FBI. And what is really scary about what we found was it was multiple agencies, multiple offices within those agencies, and to the tune of dozens of people that knew, and we know this for a fact, they knew at least approximately 1 year before I was arrested that I did not and could not have committed any illegal act, especially the one that they were fabricating. And we actually found, which also is precedented, we found evidence where the fabricated documents that they were prosecuting me on, which I never signed and I never saw, but they were the basis of the indictment that was came down against me.
So, Steven, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Steven Nerayoff talk about this next claim that you're dropping against the government. Could you just speak about that? This dropping this week against the government?
Yes, I mean it's really very, very, very difficult to sue the U.S. government. They're pretty much immune from all actions, with a very limited exception. And there's a thing called the Federal Tort Claims Act that Congress carved out. It was around the 50s or so, and they said basically we are giving the U.S. citizens the privilege of suing the federal government if they are harmed by federal employees in extremely limited circumstances. And those circumstances are, there's about 5 or 6 kind of what's called intentional torts. And so in this case, it's like a malicious prosecution or false arrest, something like that. And it gets even more tedious, and you can't sue anybody in those agencies. It has to be by an agent, basically somebody with arrest power. So you have to find a very specific thing that they did. You have to find an agent that did that specific thing. If it's, for example,
so what did you find in your federal tort claim that you're going against the government this week?
What we found was actually pretty simple. We found a criminal complaint that was sworn by an FBI agent, and we proved that virtually every single statement that he made, and it was sworn under oath in front of a federal magistrate, was perjured. And we had proof to the extent of each one of those were perjured. We found a secondary thing where we had fabricated evidence that was used against me to indict me that was being sent, and knowingly it was fabricated.
Which agent are you talking about? Which agency?
This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 2 different offices, the New York office and the Seattle office.
Did you see, Steven, this video dropped by Eric Cochran yesterday with the FBI guy saying they want to, quote, chop Alex Jones's legs off and, quote, take his money away? Did you see that?
Yeah, yes.
It almost seems like in some theoretical way that if what you're saying is true, that this FBI agent just came after you like this to harm you, that there's some admission in some smoke-filled back room to that, they would have said something to the same effect, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And why would they want to come after you? A lot of people don't. I mean, a lot of people do know who you are, but for people who don't know who you are, what would be the motivation for the FBI to try to target you this way?
So there was an event that happened between the SEC and folks in the private industry and the Chinese Communist, an entity very closely aligned with the Chinese Communist Party. And I was one of the original folks at Ethereum that structured that. I was the only one that actually had the information, the knowledge, and the documentation that could unwind that entire. When I say conspiracy, I don't mean in terms of it's a potential. It actually happened, and I actually have the documentation, the knowledge to unwind it. I was the only person who had that.
We have some people on the air here. I think Alan Dershowitz is here. Alan, can you hear me?
I hear you. Do you hear me?
I hear you. Good. Would you like to comment on Steven Nerayoff's tort claim? Are you familiar with that?
Sure, I'm very familiar with it. Look, for 50 years, I have been strongly opposed to the government targeting anybody who is a dissident or unpopular or whistleblower. As you probably know, I wrote a book called Get Trump, where, although I'm not a Trump supporter, I strongly opposed efforts to try to target Trump in order to influence the election. And my research has suggested that Steven Nerayoff has been improperly targeted as a result of his activities in crypto. Crypto is widely misunderstood. It's very controversial, and it's often not sufficiently regulated. And so pioneers like Mr. Nerayoff are obvious targets for being prosecuted. In this case, the prosecution failed, but it exacted an enormous toll on him, both from a business point of view and a personal point of view. And so I agreed to be a constitutional consultant on the case. My expertise is in the Constitution and in the law, not on the facts. And so I'm leaving it to Mr. Nerayoff and his other lawyers to develop the factual record. But I'm very familiar with the case law and the case law that opposes a specific targeting of American citizens by law enforcement. So I'm following the case very carefully and will play an appropriate role at the appropriate time to raise and focus on the constitutional issues.
Hey, Alan, while I have you here, did you happen to see the video, the one that broke on the Federal Reserve today, but the one yesterday involving the FBI, CIA officers saying they want to go after Alex Jones to, quote, take his money away, quote, chop his legs off? Did you see that clip?
Well, I haven't, but that's exactly the kind of thing I'm concerned about. Look, I'm certainly not a fan of Alex Jones. I think things that he said about the shootings and other kinds of things are dangerous and absurd. But my job has been for 50 years to represent the most unpopular, the most controversial, the most targeted by the government, to try to make sure that we never get to a place like the Soviet Union got to in the 1930s, when the head of the KGB said to Stalin, "Show me the man and I'll find you the crime." That's what targeting is all about, whether it's Alex Jones or whether it's Steven Nerayoff or whether it's Donald Trump. It creates tremendous...
Alan Dershowitz, this guy actually said, quote, "We can put anybody in jail if you know what to do," unquote. And I guess the question that I'm getting, and Eric Cochran, we both do this for a living every week, we put out these undercover videos exposing, is what can be done? Can Alex Jones sue that guy like Steven Nerayoff is on the Federal Tort Claims Act as a matter of constitutional law? How does that work?
Well, Mr. Nerayoff can do it because he was prosecuted, and he can show actual damages and can show the kind of elements that are necessary for relief. Just threatening to go after Alex Jones and saying cut his legs off is a much harder lawsuit to bring. Look, it was Justice Robert Jackson, who was our chief prosecutor at Nuremberg, and who was the Attorney General of the United States, who said any creative prosecutor can rummage through the statute books and find something on anybody. And the object of the law is to make sure that it's applied fairly, objectively, only based on criminal conduct, not based on activities that are sought to be unpopular. Look, on Monday, Donald Trump is going on trial for a non-crime. It's just not a crime what he's accused of doing, paying hush money to a former prostitute, although he denies that she was, that he had a relationship with her, and then failing to report that on various forums. It's just not a crime. It's not a state crime. It's not a federal crime. The prosecution made it up.
Dakota speaks about a very serious subject that hits home for many of us. Today, I come before you to illuminate a troubling reality unfolding at our nation's southern border. A reality that demands our attention and calls into question the moral fabric of our society. The narrative I bring forth is not just a narrative of the past, but a pressing concern for the present and the future. Picture the scene, along the dusty stretches of the United States-Mexico border. Families seeking refuge and a better life are met with a harsh reality. Enter the border control officers, entrusted with the solemn duty to enforce our nation's immigration laws. Yet, under the directives of Alejandro Mayorkas, they are compelled to carry out orders that defy the very essence of humanity and the United States Constitution. These officers, much like Hans Weber of old Nazi Germany, find themselves at a crossroads of conscience and obedience. They are tasked with putting illegal immigrants on planes and buses without proper vetting. A mandate that runs counter to the principles of justice and compassion, ultimately endangering the lives of Americans both young and old. Despite their reservations, they choose to comply, believing themselves absolved of responsibility by the mere act of following orders. But as our narrative unfolds, we witness the harrowing consequences of their actions. Families torn apart. Molly Cecilia Tibbetts, a 20-year-old University of Iowa student, murdered by an illegal. Laken Riley, a 22-year-old student at Augusta University, was killed on February 22 while jogging on the nearby University of Georgia campus. While jogging at her school, children separated from their parents, raped and sold into sex slavery from massage parlors across the United States to private homes. Individuals subjected to untold hardships and dangers as they are transported across the country without proper vetting or oversight. The echoes of their suffering reverberate through the corridors of power. But those responsible seek to shift blame onto their superiors, claiming they were merely following orders. Yet, let us be clear, obedience does not absolve us of responsibility. Even in the face of directives from the highest authority, we are still accountable for our actions. The lessons of history, from the Nuremberg trials to countless other examples, remind us that justice knows no bounds. Those who break the law, even under the guise of following orders, will be held to account. As we grapple with the complexities of our modern world, Let us not turn a blind eye to the injustices occurring at our doorstep. Let us recognize the agency we possess as individuals, the power to choose right from wrong, even in the face of pressure and adversity. The NGOs that work with the border guards are also guilty, but the buck stops with the agent who swears to uphold the Constitution of the United States. At the end of this video, we will roll just a few of the deaths and crimes these border guards are responsible for. More death and destruction that I have heard of in my lifetime. Shame on those border guards. If God does not strike them dead, an FBI agent will yank them out of their homes and lock them up for life. Just like the Nazi Hans Weber, who was only following orders. So let us stand firm in our commitment to justice, to compassion, and to the inherent dignity of every human being. Let us reject the temptation of blind obedience and instead strive to uphold the principles of truth, empathy, and accountability. Please call your state attorney and local police department and ask them to arrest these border control officers and NGOs that are assisting these illegals into the United States. Before we have to use our Second Amendment rights and become the militia that the Constitution outlines. In conclusion, I implore you to remember the words of Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Let us be the good men and women who stand up against injustice, who refuse to turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, and who, in doing so, ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated.
Somebody from the streets, and I was like a border patrol agent. And then they told me he went after another victim, and I was in shock. I was like, what is going on?
Him being in a position of trust and being a border patrol agent makes it even more egregious that somebody who is entrusted with protection and defending the Constitution and the laws of the United States, that he would commit murder of this magnitude. Multiple people.
The lessons of history, from the Nuremberg trials to countless other examples, remind us that justice knows no bounds. Those who break the law, even under the guise of following orders, will be held to account. As we grapple with the complexities of our modern world, let us not turn a blind eye to the injustices occurring at our doorstep. Let us recognize the agency we possess as individuals, the power to choose right from wrong, even in the face of pressure and adversity. The NGOs that work with the border guards are also guilty, but the buck stops with the agent who swears to uphold the Constitution of the United States.